We all must learn from the Master named Jesus, but the Master named Jesus also calls us to go out and serve in the valley of need.
Welcome to the La Casa de Cristo Sermoncast. We invite you to check out our website, lacasadecristo.com, for everything going on at the church. Also, follow us on social media under the username La Casa Family. Now, let's get into the sermon.
For those of you that don't know, that was a very popular song a number of years ago by The Clash, and it was titled, "Should I Stay or Should I Go?" It was about a rather toxic relationship between a man and a woman and the debate whether they should stay in the relationship or not. But I think it's also a question that applies to us in light of this gospel that Paul just read for us about Peter, James, and John on the Mount of Transfiguration. Should we stay or should we go? You know, there's all sorts of interpretations of this text, which is always the gospel text on the last Sunday before the Lenten season begins. And we can try all we want to explain the mystery of Elijah and Moses, the law and the prophets, and Jesus literally being transformed, transfigured before them. But I'd like to focus on Peter, James, and John as we can relate to them. And here they are, having this wonderful spiritual experience, and they want to build tents and hang out there. And yet Jesus says, no, we must go down the mountain into the valley of need. Should we stay or should we go? And that's a question we all have to answer, and indeed it's an important one. Now, when you ask a question, you got to be prepared for the answer, and sometimes the answer isn't one that you like. I've shared this with some of our Bible studies, but there's a fun story, a humorous story about a rather long-winded pastor who was known to go on and on during his sermons. And during the middle of one of his sermons, one of the more prominent members of the congregation stood up and walked out in the middle of the sermon. So thinking he had said something to offend him, he talked to his wife after the service and said, "What did I say that offended John?" And she said, "Oh, it wasn't anything you said. He decided to get a haircut." He said, "Wait a minute." He said, it's Sunday morning. You know, he decided to get a haircut. She said, "Yes, well, first of all, Supercuts is open all the time. And second of all, he didn't need a haircut when the sermon began." So the reality is that sometimes in life we get an answer to things that we don't want to hear. And the reality is, for you and me this morning, I want to put this in modern terms. I want you to think of the person that maybe you most admire in the public sphere. Maybe it is a celebrity, maybe it is a musician, maybe it is someone in the world of business or finance, maybe it's an author, maybe it's someone in the world of sports. And I want you to imagine that you won a free weekend to listen, to just sit at the feet of that person at a resort here in North Phoenix. Everything was paid, and you could go and just listen to them speak for 2 or 3 days. And so you go to Friday night, and there's an opening dinner, and everything's wonderful, and you hear the person speak, and you're looking forward to just listening to them all weekend. But on Saturday morning, the speaker tells you that the conference is over, and that they're all going down together, himself included, and you're going to go down to South Phoenix. And you're going to serve the homeless and the hungry in a food shelter there. Because you need to be serving your fellow man and not just soaking up wisdom from famous people. You see, that was really the dilemma that Peter, James, and John face, and that you and I face as well. What's the balance in our life? What is the balance between being fed spiritually, listening to God, staying on the mountaintop with Him, and also then understanding that you can't stay on that mountaintop forever, that you can't build these tents, as Jesus said to Peter, James, and John, that as much as they wanted to stay there in that place of comfort, that they had to go and serve in the valley of need. Now, when they went down the mountain, the gospel reports that Jesus instructed them to tell no one anything about this experience. Biblical scholars call this the messianic secret, that Jesus' identity as Son of Man and Son of God was not fully revealed until the appropriate time, until the time of God's choosing. But in the meantime, they still had to go down to the mountain. They had to go down from the mountain and serve in the valley of need, to continue to preach and teach and heal. So what about you and me? What is that balance in our life? What I'd like to suggest this morning is it's different for each of us. And unfortunately, what we tend to do is we look at it in linear ways. And so we say, well, this part of my life is about being fed spiritually, about studying the Word, about devotions, about prayer, about being part of a group. And then this part of my life is about serving others, whether that's through La Casa de Cristo or through somewhere else. But I'd like to suggest that life is a mix of all of those things. And there are moments when we are serving others and helping others out, and we run spiritually dry, and we find the need to return to the Word, to return to prayer, to return for refreshment. And in other moments as well, that in those moments of spiritual growth, of studying the Word, of being involved in a Bible study or a small group, that we can't ignore or be deaf to the needs of others. And what we want to do is we want to classify that in nice, neat little boxes. But what Jesus showed and proved in His own ministry was there's never the right moment. There's always a moment of need. There's always a moment for spiritual growth. And so it's up to you and me to figure that out in our life together. Where are you at with that? Should you stay or should you go? Or is it both? And in the middle of that, to answer those questions is a good thing for us to do as we stand ready on the brink of beginning our Lenten journey together. This week, I was honored on Friday to attend a community luncheon that honored vital and blood services here in the Valley. And the guest speaker was a man that some of you may remember the name from a couple years ago, a Phoenix police officer named Tyler Moldovan. Tyler was a young man recently married when he was shot 8 times, including once in the neck. As he was laying in the hospital bed that night of the shooting, the doctors called his wife and all of his family members in to say goodbye to him because they did not believe that he would live. But through many long and painful months of recovery, of learning to eat and talk and walk again, of learning all things over again as a young baby would, Tyler Moldovan walked up to the stage to a standing ovation on his own, and with his wife Chelsea publicly proclaimed his faith in Jesus Christ was what got them through these dark times. He will always have medical challenges. He will always have issues in his life. He will probably always need to walk with assistance, with a walker or a cane. But after hearing him, I said to myself, I can never complain about anything ever again in my life. Now, the reality is I'm a human being and I will. But what he showed me was, here was a man who was serving the public as a police officer. He was shot in the line of duty. And then he had to be fed. He had to literally be fed by his loved ones. Fed spiritually, fed by the doctors and nurses. And so his time of serving turned into a time of growing and learning and spiritual growth together. And now he's turned it around and he's going out and he's serving again by speaking to groups and sharing his story and motivating and helping us to understand that most of the challenges we have in our life are very, very small compared to what he has been through. But most of all, it is our faith that sustains us. We will gather here at 7 p.m. on Wednesday night in the sanctuary. And we begin our Lenten journey. I encourage you to be here to begin this opportunity of spiritual growth. I encourage you to learn and grow together with the devotional that's been written for you. And whether you're doing it on your own or in a small group or with your family, that we learn and grow together. We all must learn from the Master named Jesus, but the Master named Jesus also calls us to go out and serve in the valley of need. And as you and I look at the daily news, as we look at everything that's going on in our nation and in our world, sometimes we wonder, what difference does it make? What difference does it make to be a disciple of Jesus Christ? What difference does it make to serve our foster kids here at La Casa de Cristo through Royal Family Kids Camp, or to pack meals for the hungry and homeless around the world through Feed My Starving Children? What difference does it make for our Food from the Heart ministry that helps our own members out with meals and in need, or to go monthly to serve at St. Vincent de Paul, or all the other things that we do in terms of outreach in this community? Does it really make a difference? And the message from the Mount of Transfiguration is this: yes, it does. Lauren Isley tells the powerful story of a young man who was on the beach the morning after a storm. There along the beach were thousands of starfish. And of course, because they had washed up on shore, they were dying because they were not in the water. And the little boy, one by one, was picking up the starfish and throwing them back into the ocean. And a grumpy old man came up to him and said, "Son, what are you doing? This isn't going to make a difference. Look at how many thousands and thousands of starfish there are on the beach. You can't possibly think that you will make a difference." And the little boy picked up the starfish, picked up one, and he threw it into the ocean. And he said, "It makes a difference to that one." This is our calling. So not just stay on the mountain, but serve in the valley of need. Should you stay? Should you go? How much time do you spend at the feet of the Master, and how much time do you roll up your sleeves and get to work? Only you can answer that question. And as we begin our Lenten journey together, let us all ask the question: should we stay or should we go? Amen.